If you look at a dollar bill today, you see George Washington's face staring back at you. You see the words Federal Reserve Note printed across the top. But you're not looking at money. You're looking at a weapon that was forged in the desert in 1974. A weapon that gave the United States the power to tax every human being on Earth without firing a single shot. Most people believe the dollar is powerful because America is powerful. They think it's backed by gold or innovation or democracy. That is a lie. The real reason the dollar rules the world has nothing to do with freedom. It has everything to do with a secret agreement signed between an American diplomat and a Saudi king. It was a deal written in oil and sealed with blood. It was the deal that saved the American empire from total economic collapse. And it may be the deal that destroys it. This is the story of the petrodollar. This is the story of how one handshake in Riyadh turned paper into power. And this is the story of how that power is now slipping away. Before we talk about the deal, we need to understand what the United States was running from. In 1971, America was bleeding out. Not on a battlefield, on a balance sheet. For over 2 decades, the global financial system had been governed by the Bretton Woods Agreement. Under this system, the U.S. dollar was the only currency backed by physical gold. If France or Germany or Japan had dollars, they could take them to the U.S. Treasury and exchange them for real gold bars. 1 ounce for $35. This made the dollar as good as gold. It made the dollar the anchor of the entire global economy. But by the late 60s, the anchor was sinking. The United States was spending billions on the Vietnam War. It was funding massive social programs at home. It was printing dollars far faster than it was mining gold. And the world noticed. France was the first to call the bluff. Charles de Gaulle began converting his dollars into gold and shipping it across the Atlantic. Germany followed. Then Switzerland. The U.S. gold reserves were vanishing. The vaults at Fort Knox were being drained. The math was simple and brutal. America had promised more gold than it actually owned. President Richard Nixon was trapped in a corner. On August 15, 1971, he went on national television and made an announcement that would change the world forever. He declared that the United States would no longer honor the gold standard. Effective immediately, dollars could not be exchanged for gold. The link was severed. Overnight, the dollar became a fiat currency. It was backed by nothing but trust. And trust was evaporating fast. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Inflation exploded across the United States. The value of the dollar collapsed against foreign currencies. Gas prices surged. Food prices doubled. The stock market hemorrhaged. The entire post-war economic order was disintegrating in real time. America had gone from being the world's banker to being the world's biggest debtor. And now its currency was floating in thin air, with no anchor and no credibility. The American empire was facing the same fate as every empire before it: bankruptcy. If the world stopped accepting dollars, the game was over. The military couldn't be funded. The debt couldn't be rolled over. The standard of living would collapse. Washington needed a new plan. It needed to make the world want dollars again. Not because of gold, but because of something even more essential. Something that every economy on Earth desperately needed to survive. They found it in oil, black gold, liquid power, the lifeblood of the modern world. In October of 1973, The world economy was hit by a seismic shock. The Arab nations, led by Saudi Arabia, imposed an oil embargo on the West. They were punishing the United States and Europe for supporting Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Within weeks, oil prices quadrupled. Gas stations ran dry. People waited in lines for hours just to fill their tanks. Factories shut down. Airlines grounded their fleets. The industrial world was paralyzed. It was an economic heart attack. But one man saw the crisis as an opportunity. His name was Henry Kissinger. He was the United States Secretary of State and one of the most brilliant and ruthless strategists in modern history. Kissinger understood something that most people missed. The oil crisis was not a disaster, it was leverage. If the United States could control the flow of oil money, it could control the entire global economy. It could replace gold with oil as the foundation of the dollar. In 1974, Kissinger and a small team of American officials made a secret trip to Saudi Arabia. They flew into Riyadh under tight security. The meetings were not publicized. The details were classified for decades. Kissinger sat down with King Faisal and the Saudi royal family, and he made them an offer that would reshape the financial architecture of the planet. Saudi Arabia at the time was a wealthy nation with massive oil reserves, but it was also deeply vulnerable. It was surrounded by hostile neighbors. The Soviet Union was expanding its influence across the Middle East. Revolutionary movements threatened the monarchy from within. The House of Saud was sitting on an ocean of oil, but living in constant fear. They needed protection. They needed military power. They needed a guarantee that their regime would survive. Kissinger gave them exactly that. He promised that the United States would provide absolute military protection to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. America would sell them the most advanced weapon systems in the world. It would train their armed forces. It would shield them from any external threat. As long as the United States existed, the House of Saud would be safe. It was a promise of eternal security, a blood pact between two empires. But the price was steep. In exchange for this military umbrella, Saudi Arabia had to agree to two non-negotiable terms. First, all Saudi oil exports had to be priced exclusively in U.S. dollars, not British pounds, not German marks, not Japanese yen. If any country in the world wanted to buy Saudi oil, they had to pay in American currency. This was the foundation of the Petrodollar system. Second, Saudi Arabia had to take the surplus profits from its oil sales and reinvest them into the United States. They would buy U.S. Treasury bonds. They would lend their oil wealth back to the American government. This would finance America's growing debt and keep interest rates low. It was a closed loop. The Saudis sold oil for dollars. Then they gave the dollars back to Washington, and Washington used the money to fund its empire. By 1975, every other member of OPEC had followed Saudi Arabia's lead. Oil, the most vital commodity on earth, was now only sold in dollars. The petrodollar was born, and with it, the United States had pulled off one of the greatest economic coups in human history. Think about what this meant. Every nation on earth needed oil to power its factories, its cars, its military, its hospitals. And now, every nation was forced to hold massive reserves of U.S. dollars just to buy that oil. If Japan wanted oil, it had to sell cars to America for dollars. If Germany wanted oil, it had to export machinery for dollars. The entire global economy became dependent on acquiring and holding American currency. This created artificial and permanent demand for the dollar. It didn't matter how much money the Federal Reserve printed. As long as the world needed oil, the world needed dollars. The United States could now run enormous budget deficits and print trillions of dollars without triggering hyperinflation at home. Why? Because the inflation was exported. Every time the Fed printed money, it was effectively taxing every person on the planet who needed energy. The petrodollar turned the U.S. dollar into the ultimate financial weapon. If a country didn't obey Washington, it could be cut off from the dollar system. And if it couldn't access dollars, it couldn't buy oil. And if it couldn't buy oil, its economy would collapse. Sovereignty became solvency. The United States now had the power to decide which nations would thrive and which would starve. It was colonization without colonies, domination without occupation. For 50 years, this system held. It was the foundation of American supremacy. It funded the largest military in human history. It allowed Americans to consume far more than they produced. It enabled the U.S. government to borrow endlessly at artificially low interest rates. The rest of the world worked. America printed. It was the ultimate free lunch. But every rigged system eventually faces a reckoning, and the cracks in the petrodollar are now becoming chasms. The world is changing. The alliance between Washington and Riyadh, once unbreakable, is now fragile. The trust that was forged in the 1970s is gone, and the nations of the world are waking up to the reality that they have been trapped in a system designed to benefit one country at the expense of all others. The first crack appeared within the United States itself. The rise of fracking technology transformed America into one of the largest oil producers in the world. By 2018, the United States was energy independent. It no longer needed Saudi oil. And when you don't need someone's product, you stop caring about their security. The royal family in Riyadh watched as Washington shifted its focus. The U.S. began negotiating with Iran. It criticized Saudi human rights abuses. The military support that had once been guaranteed now felt conditional. The Saudis realized they had been used. They had spent 50 years propping up the dollar, and now when they needed American support the most, it was nowhere to be found. So they started looking for new allies. They started looking east. China is now the largest importer of oil in the world. It is the engine of global manufacturing and the second largest economy on the planet. For decades, China was forced to play by the petrodollar rules. It had to earn dollars by exporting goods to America. Then it used those dollars to buy oil. But China is tired of this game. It wants to use its own currency, the yuan, to buy energy. For the past several years, quiet negotiations have been taking place between Beijing and Riyadh. They are discussing the one thing that was absolutely forbidden by the 1974 agreement. They are discussing the possibility of selling oil in yuan. If Saudi Arabia agrees to accept yuan for oil, the petrodollar dies. The artificial demand for dollars will collapse. Countries will no longer need to hoard American currency. They will start dumping their treasury bonds. Trillions of dollars will flood back into the United States, triggering the kind of hyperinflation that the secret deal was designed to prevent. This is why the Middle East has been a war zone for decades. It is not about democracy. It is not about human rights. It is about protecting the petrodollar at all costs. Every leader who has tried to bypass the dollar has been destroyed. Saddam Hussein announced in the year 2000 that Iraq would start selling its oil in euros instead of dollars. 3 years later, the United States invaded Iraq. Saddam was captured and executed. One of the first acts of the new Iraqi government was to switch oil sales back to dollars. Muammar Gaddafi proposed creating a gold-backed African currency to trade oil and bypass the dollar entirely. In 2011, NATO bombed Libya into chaos. Gaddafi was killed in the streets. His gold disappeared. His plan was erased. The pattern is clear. Any nation that threatens the dominance of the petrodollar becomes a target. The system is enforced not by economists but by bombers and drones and aircraft carriers. The secret deal is written in ink but defended with blood. But you can only hold back the tide for so long. Today we are witnessing the rise of the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries represent nearly half of the world's population and a growing share of global GDP, and they are building an alternative financial system. They are creating new trade networks that bypass the dollar. They are developing digital currencies. They are increasing their gold reserves at record levels. The catalyst for this shift was the freezing of Russia's dollar reserves after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. When the United States and Europe froze $300 billion of Russian assets, it sent shock waves through every capital in the world. The message was unmistakable. If you don't obey Washington, your money is not safe. Even central bank reserves, once considered sacred, could be seized at the push of a button. This terrified nations across the global south. They realized that holding dollars was not just an economic decision. It was a political risk. If they ever fell out of favor with Washington, their national savings could be confiscated. So they started diversifying. They started buying gold. They started trading in local currencies. The process of de-dollarization accelerated. Saudi Arabia, the linchpin of the entire petrodollar system, is now hedging its bets. In 2023, it joined the BRICS alliance. It has conducted oil transactions in yuan with China. It has signed massive infrastructure deals with Beijing as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. The Saudis are signaling to the world that the age of American dominance is ending. They are preparing for a post-dollar world. The House of Saud is playing a dangerous game. They are using the leverage that Kissinger gave them 50 years ago. They know that if they walk away from the dollar, the entire system collapses. And they are using that threat to extract more concessions from Washington while simultaneously building closer ties with Beijing and Moscow. It is the ultimate betrayal of the 1974 deal. The student has learned from the master. If the petrodollar collapses, the American way of life changes overnight. The United States will no longer be able to print money with impunity. The national debt, currently over $34 trillion, will become unsustainable. Interest rates will skyrocket. The cost of imports will explode. Everything from electronics to clothing to food will become drastically more expensive. The government will be forced to make brutal choices. Cut spending, raise taxes, or print even more money and risk hyperinflation. Most Americans have no idea how much of their prosperity is built on the foundation of the petrodollar. They don't realize that their ability to buy cheap goods from around the world is subsidized by a system that forces other nations to hold dollars. They don't understand that the secret deal made in a desert in 1974 is the reason their grocery bills are as low as they are. When that system breaks, the illusion of wealth will vanish. We are living through the twilight of the petrodollar era. The signs are everywhere. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace in decades. Trade agreements are being signed in currencies other than the dollar. The Saudi-Chinese relationship is deepening. The BRICS nations are expanding. The world is slowly, methodically preparing for the end of dollar dominance. The collapse may happen slowly, or it may happen all at once. But the result will be the same. The power that was centralized in Washington will be redistributed. The world will move toward a multipolar financial system where no single currency can be weaponized. The era of the American monetary empire will come to an end. This is the great economic transition of our time. It is the story the mainstream media refuses to tell because it exposes the true nature of global power. It reveals that empires are not built on ideals. They are built on ledgers. And when the ledger no longer balances, the empire falls. The secret deal that Henry Kissinger negotiated in 1974 was a masterpiece of realpolitik. It saved the dollar from collapse. It gave the United States 50 years of unrivaled financial dominance. It funded a military machine that spanned the globe. It created a standard of living that previous generations could never have imagined. But it also created a system of global debt and dependency. It allowed America to live beyond its means for half a century, and now the bill is coming due. The petrodollar was never meant to last forever. It was a bridge, a temporary solution to the crisis of 1971. But bridges eventually crumble. The gold is gone. The oil monopoly is breaking. The trust is shattered. And the nations of the world are no longer willing to accept a system where one country controls the price of survival. As you hold the dollar in your hand today, understand what it represents. It is not just a piece of paper. It is the remnant of a secret agreement made between two men in a palace in Riyadh. It is the ghost of a system that traded military protection for monetary control. It is a symbol of an empire that ruled not through conquest, but through the control of energy and debt. The petrodollar gave us half a century of dominance, but it left us with a debt that can never be repaid and a world that is preparing to move on without us. The reckoning is here. The system is cracking, and the history books will record this as the moment when the empire built on oil and paper began its